In modern times, human history is well documented, thanks to social media and the internet. These modern technologies allow us to document and share events in real time from different perspectives around the world. But human history hasn't always been like that, and sometimes you'll come across the unknown history of the world. Number 5. The story of the 588th Regiment of the Soviet Army is a perfect example of a story from history that has all but been forgotten. This little piece of unknown history demonstrates the will and determination of women in the Soviet Union, and how their willingness and sacrifices benefited the cause at hand. At the onset of World War II, Marina Raskova put her aviation skills to proper use and joined the Soviet Army as a navigator. At the time, women in the Soviet Union were allowed to serve in the armed forces. However, they found themselves placed in more auxiliary roles, such as navigators or engineers. Word quickly spread about Marina's valiant efforts as the first female Soviet navigator, and she received hundreds of letters from other women who wanted to join and fight. Seeing the toll that the war was taking on her comrades, Marina wrote to Joseph Stalin and asked for permission for women to be allowed into combat and to create an all-female fighting squadron. Stalin saw the same trajectory for his troops as Marina did, and granted permission for 3 female squadrons to be created, the most infamous of which, and the one we're going to talk about, being the 588th. Marina was overjoyed to hear that Stalin had signed off on the squadron, and began filing through more than 2,000 application forms. In the end, she selected 400 women for the 3 new squadrons, and set about training them at the Ingalls School of Aviation. Their male counterparts had years of experience on them, and subsequently, the women of the 588th Regiment were forced to condense years of training into a matter of months. The women of the 588th were expected to learn how to be a pilot, a navigator, as well as being able to perform maintenance and groundwork. The men at the base didn't take their arrival lightly. They were constantly harassed and were forced to wear hand-me-down uniforms and shoes that were far too big and had been designed purely for men. The spirit of the women of the 588th never broke, and on June 12, 1942, they were summoned for their first official mission. While their male counterparts enjoyed the top-of-the-line planes and brand new technology, the females' planes were incredibly slow. However, the 588th quickly realized that because of the wooden and canvas frames, they were light enough to outmaneuver enemies in the sky. The squadron flew without parachutes, radars, or even radios, but quickly cemented themselves in the minds of the opposition. Their job was to fly over German-occupied lands in the Soviet Union throughout the night, ensuring that the Nazis got little to no rest and were in constant fear of bombardment. Up to 80 women would fly between 8 and 18 times a night, all while suffering in the below-freezing conditions without much protection. Their nighttime tirades earned them the name Night Witches. The women quickly embraced this new nickname and wore it as a badge of honor, rather than seeing it as an insult. By May of 1945, the Night Witches had successfully conducted over 30,000 missions as a unit. Once the war was over, Marina and other leaders of the unit were given the Hero of the Soviet Union award, and became some of the first women in the Soviet Union to ever achieve such commendation. Number 4. Similar to the unknown story of the Night Witches is that of Maria Octabriskia. Her story is perhaps one of the most incredible in history. However, it remains as one of the most forgotten. In 1905, she was born in a small village in Ukraine. Maria did not have an easy start in life. Her family were forced to flee to a village in the very far east of Russia in 1930. Up to that point, they were under constant surveillance and were the subject of distrust following the revolution. Luckily for Maria, she had married a cavalry officer named Ilya in early 1925, and she was able to stay in her village. Both she and Ilya decided that their new remarried name would be Octabriskia, which means October, in honor of the October Revolution her family were accused of standing against. Maria may have escaped exile, but her husband's job meant that she had to travel around her former hometown with him while he worked on various missions. While in the barracks of whatever city she may have been in, Maria busied herself and learned how to drive and mastered several weapons. When she wasn't working on her military skills, she worked as a telephone operator and told her fellow military wives to, quote, "marry a military man and you will serve in the army. Being an officer's wife is not only a proud woman, but a responsible one." Maria and Ilya believed that they were living a good and happy life. However, the onset of World War II was slowly creeping up behind them. In 1940, Ilya transferred out to Moldova, while Maria, along with other military wives, were sent to Siberia for their own safety. Maria did her best to get on with life, knowing that one day she and her beloved husband would be reunited. Sadly, in 1943, she received news that Ilya had passed away in 1941 in Kiev, and that officers had withheld the news from her for over 2 years. Something inside Maria changed that day, and overnight, she became a force to be reckoned with. Over the course of the next few months, she plunged herself into fundraising 50,000 rubles in order to buy herself a tank. She sold all of her possessions and went around the town and villages, pleading with people to support her cause. In the end, she raised the money needed, and the Soviet army agreed to buy her a tank and let her be the driver. Maria wrote the words "fighting girlfriend" on the tank and vowed to avenge her husband. Maria and her infamous tank fought in battles across the country, but in January of 1944, she was injured while performing repairs to the tank. She passed away as a result of her injuries. However, the legacy of the fighting girlfriend lived on and forced the Soviet Union to readdress their stance on women of war. She was also given the Hero of the Soviet Union award posthumously. Number 3. Nellie Bly's work has largely gone undiscussed by modern historians, but her work is perhaps some of the creepiest in history. In 1887, Nellie Bly found herself in New York desperate for work. She had recently left her job as a reporter at the Pittsburgh Dispatch and hoped to further her career in New York, but sadly this wasn't the case. Nellie had underestimated how difficult it would be for a woman to get a job as a reporter, and 4 months into her search, she almost called it quits. That was until she met Joseph Pulitzer of the New York World magazine and convinced him to give her a job. This job was unlike any other that Nellie had ever done before, and saw her on the front lines of some of the worst conditions in New York. Pulitzer had asked Nellie to go undercover and fake insanity to gain entrance into the women's lunatic asylum on Blackwell's Island and write a report on the conditions. In her book, 10 Days in a Madhouse, Nellie wrote, quote, "I had some faith in my own ability as an actress, and I thought I could assume insanity long enough to accomplish any mission entrusted to me. Could I pass a week at the insane ward at Blackwell's Island? I said I could, I would, and I did." In total, Nellie spent 10 days in the asylum before Pulitzer got her out. Her magazine article sent shockwaves across New York as residents' worst fears became a reality. People had often heard stories of the mistreatment of those locked away in asylums, but never before had they read a first-hand account from someone who had witnessed it themselves. In the article, Nellie wrote how she was subjected to ice-cold baths, inedible food with spiders in it, and was given a single woolen blanket to keep herself warm at night. Blackwell's Island was the subject of a lengthy investigation after the article was published, and while they tried their best to deflect the blame and cover up their shortcomings, the investigating bodies saw right through it and implemented changes as well as boosting the budgets for such institutions. Nellie's work was not only dangerous but necessary, and her bravery to go undercover in such an institution brought about real change for those who were affected. Number 2. Percy Julian was determined to break down the barriers and stigma in place against young African American men, in not only the scientific circle, but society as a whole. Ever since his birth, Percy had the prejudice of being the grandson of an enslaved person, writing against him, but this did little to stop him. Percy was born in 1899 in Montgomery, Alabama, and by the time he had reached high school, the world had done little to prepare him for life as an academic. In fact, people were almost certain that Percy wouldn't achieve his dreams of becoming a chemist, but thankfully, he went on to prove them wrong. After graduating high school, Percy attended DePaul University, where he studied chemistry, working day and night to finish his studies. His hard work and dedication paid off, and in 1920, he graduated first of his class with honors, much to the amazement of everyone else at DePaul. Percy didn't stop there. After completing his undergraduate degree, he took a teaching position at Fisk University before he was offered a scholarship at Harvard University. Percy dreamed of completing his PhD at Harvard. However, the university would not allow him to. Many would have given up by now, but Percy was determined, and after meeting Joseph Pickel, who worked at the University of Vienna, Percy decided it was time to pack his bags and obtain his PhD elsewhere. Pickel and Percy got on famously, and once their time was up in Vienna, the two headed back to the US to work at DePaul University. It would be at DePaul where Percy would make history when he successfully synthesized a chemical that's now widely used to treat glaucoma. He pioneered methods that allowed scientists to synthesize hormones and other compounds artificially. His work is the driving force behind the synthesis of progesterone, testosterone, cortisone, and hydrocortisone. Despite his many successes and advancements, DePaul University refused to make him a professor because of his race. He also tried to get a job in the private sector, however, also found that companies rejected him due to his race. Finally, Glidden Company approached him with a job offer, and Percy went on to have a successful career with them as a lab director. In 1973, Percy Julian became the first black chemist to be elected into the National Academy of Sciences. It wasn't until decades later that Percy's achievements were recognized by the scientific community, and to this day, his legacy lives on. Number 1. Hidden deep in America's history is an ancient indigenous city that's believed to be the jumping-off point of many advanced societies throughout North America. The Cahokia Mounds State Historic Site is located near Collinsville, Illinois, and is one of only 20 World Heritage Sites in the United States. Historians believe that the civilization existed from 600 to 1400 AD, and that it served as the largest central hub for what we know as the Mesoamerican civilizations throughout the US, Canada, and Mexico. Many groups of people called Cahokia home, such as the Natchez, the Pensacola, the Choctaw, and the Ofo. Archaeologists and historians also uncovered that at least 1/3 of the population had originated from elsewhere before moving into the metropolis and calling it home. Other evidence shows that the people of Cahokia farmed, traded, and hunted just like any other civilization, and also meticulously planned their land to ensure that everyone was able to fit. It's been estimated that the population of Cahokia was anywhere between 8,000 and 40,000. And in 1250, its population was far bigger than that of London. Many people in the US are unaware of the historically significant site right in front of their eyes. How come Cahokia didn't make it into the history books like so many other civilizations that came afterwards? Well, in 1350, Cahokia was mysteriously abandoned by everyone who lived there. Historians have been unable to come to a solid conclusion, as war nor disease had been able to disrupt the metropolis before 1350. Cahokia has somewhat faded into obscurity and is now known to historians as the Forgotten Rome. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.